There is a conversation happening in Hollywood that most people in the industry would rather you never heard. It is a conversation about power, about image, and about what happens when the carefully constructed facade of celebrity begins to crack under the weight of its own contradictions. At the center of this conversation sits two names that, on the surface, could not seem more different. One is a comedian who built an empire on kindness, warmth, and the simple message of being good to one another. The other is a street-sharp, unfiltered comedian who has spent decades warning anyone willing to listen that Hollywood is not what it appears to be. Ellen DeGeneres and Katt Williams. And what connects them is far more complicated than most people realize. To understand why Katt Williams has been so vocal about the entertainment industry's hidden machinery, you have to go back to who he is and why people listen when he speaks. Williams built his career not just on comedy but on truth-telling. While other entertainers carefully managed their public images and avoided controversy, Katt walked directly into the fire. He spoke openly about industry gatekeepers, about the unspoken rules that governed who rose to the top and who got pushed aside, and about the price some entertainers paid for their success. For years, many people dismissed him as eccentric or erratic, but a pattern began to emerge. The things Katt warned about had a troubling habit of eventually proving true. His warnings were never specifically about Ellen DeGeneres by name in most instances, but they were absolutely about the type of figure she represented. Williams repeatedly described Hollywood as a place where the most beloved public faces were sometimes the ones with the most to hide. He talked about how the industry rewards performers who play a role not just on screen but in real life, constructing a persona so airtight, so relentlessly positive, that the public never thinks to look behind it. He described it as one of the oldest tricks in the entertainment business. Give people a symbol of goodness and they will defend that symbol even when evidence begins to suggest they should not. Ellen DeGeneres was, for nearly 2 decades, the perfect symbol of goodness. She launched her talk show in 2003 after one of the most dramatic career collapses in modern television history. When she came out publicly as gay in 1997, the backlash was swift and severe. Her sitcom was cancelled. Brand deals evaporated. The industry that had celebrated her suddenly treated her like a liability. For several years, she was largely absent from mainstream television. Then she came back, and she came back with a message. Be kind to one another. Those 4 words became her entire brand identity. Every episode of the Ellen DeGeneres Show ended with that phrase, and audiences embraced it completely. Ellen became not just a talk show host, but a cultural institution, a living reminder that decency and warmth could thrive even in an industry as cutthroat as Hollywood. Katt Williams, however, was never impressed by carefully crafted personas. In numerous interviews and stand-up performances throughout the 2000s and 2010s, he returned again and again to the theme of Hollywood masks. He argued that the entertainment industry is fundamentally a system of performance, and that the performance never stops when the cameras are turned off. The people who rise highest, he suggested, are often those most skilled at maintaining their public character around the clock, never letting the audience see the gap between who they appear to be and who they actually are. He framed this not as a cynical observation, but as a sincere warning to anyone who admired celebrities without questioning what they were actually admiring. The warning started to feel relevant to Ellen specifically in the summer of 2020, when a wave of allegations about the working environment on her show became impossible to ignore. Former employees began speaking publicly about what it was actually like to work behind the scenes on one of the most successful daytime programs in television history. The picture they painted was jarring. Staff described an atmosphere defined by fear, by a rigid hierarchy that discouraged any direct contact with Ellen herself, and by a culture in which certain producers were permitted to behave abusively toward crew members without consequence. One former producer described being told from her very first day on the job that she was not allowed to speak to Ellen directly. The atmosphere, she said, was one in which everyone walked on eggshells constantly. What made these revelations particularly striking was not just what they described, but what they implied about the distance between public image and private reality. Ellen had built a brand entirely on the promise of kindness. Her show gave away cars, surprised deserving families with life-changing gifts, and presented its host as someone who genuinely cared about the people around her. The allegation suggested that this kindness had an off switch, that it was something performed for an audience rather than something that extended to the people who made the show possible every single day. A number of former staff members used the word toxic to describe the environment. One described the show as a place where the public persona of the host and the actual experience of working for her existed in two completely separate worlds. This is precisely the dynamic that Katt Williams had been describing for years, not about Ellen specifically, but about Hollywood broadly. He had warned that the most powerful entertainers are often those who are most completely separated their public self from their private one, and that the public self is always the one the audience sees. He spoke about how the industry protects those who play the game correctly, and how speaking out against beloved figures carries enormous professional risk. The people who had worked on Ellen's show and remained silent for years were, in many ways, a confirmation of exactly what Williams had been saying. The machinery of reputation management in Hollywood is powerful enough to keep serious concerns buried for a very long time. There were also specific moments from Ellen's on-camera career that, when examined in hindsight, began to tell a different story than the one audiences had accepted at the time. Clips resurfaced of interviews in which Ellen had pressured guests in ways that had seemed like harmless television fun, but looked considerably less comfortable on reflection. There was a well-documented exchange with actress Dakota Johnson in which Ellen claimed she had not been invited to Dakota's birthday party, only for Dakota to calmly and firmly correct the record on air. The moment was notable because Dakota refused to simply let the narrative stand, and the audience watched a rare instance of someone pushing back against the show's host in real time. More serious was the resurfaced footage involving singer Mariah Carey. During a 2008 appearance on the show, Ellen repeatedly pressured Mariah to drink champagne on air, framing it as a way of addressing pregnancy rumors that were circulating at the time. Mariah was visibly uncomfortable, deflecting the request multiple times before eventually appearing to take a small sip. What the audience did not know then, and only learned years later, was that Mariah was in fact pregnant at the time of that interview and subsequently experienced a miscarriage. Mariah herself later described the experience of that appearance as one she had difficulty processing in its aftermath. When these clips re-emerged during the wave of criticism directed at Ellen in 2020, audiences did not laugh at them the way they once had. They saw something different. They saw a host willing to use her platform and her power to extract something from a guest who had clearly indicated she did not want to give it. Katt Williams has spoken extensively about this kind of power dynamic in Hollywood. He has described the entertainment industry as a place where influence is currency, where the people at the top of the food chain have enormous capacity to shape how situations are perceived, and where those with less power often find themselves unable to object to things they find deeply uncomfortable. He has argued that the smiling, generous public image that many celebrities project is itself a form of power, because it creates a shield of public goodwill that makes allegations difficult to believe and critics easy to dismiss. When someone tells you a person is cruel or difficult, and that person has spent 20 years on national television reminding you to be kind, the instinct is to disbelieve the allegation, not the image. The question of who holds power in Hollywood and how that power is exercised has been one of the defining conversations in the entertainment industry over the past decade. The revelations surrounding figures like Harvey Weinstein fundamentally changed the way audiences think about the relationship between public persona and private behavior. They established, beyond any reasonable doubt, that it is entirely possible for someone to be universally celebrated in their public life while behaving very differently in private. Katt Williams had been making this point long before those revelations broke into mainstream consciousness. He was not the only one saying it, but he was among the most consistent and the most willing to accept the professional costs of saying it openly. What ultimately happened to the Ellen DeGeneres Show was a quiet but significant unraveling. Following the workplace allegations, Warner Media conducted an internal investigation. Several senior producers were let go. Ellen addressed her audience with an apology at the start of the show's following season, acknowledging that the working environment had not always been what it should have been and accepting some responsibility for the culture that had developed around her show. The audience response was mixed. Some viewers found the apology sincere. Others felt it was insufficient given the specifics of what had been alleged. Ratings, which had already been declining, continued to slide. In May 2021, Ellen announced that the upcoming 19th season would be the show's last. The Ellen DeGeneres Show ended in 2022 after nearly 2 decades on air. Katt Williams did not claim victory. That is not his style. What he has continued to do, in the years since all of this unfolded, is maintain that what happened with Ellen is not an isolated story. He insisted as a chapter in a much larger book about how Hollywood works, about the systems of image management that protect powerful people from accountability, and about the cost paid by those who tell the truth before anyone is ready to hear it. He has spoken about comedians and entertainers who were sidelined, discredited, or professionally destroyed for saying things that later turned out to be accurate. He positions himself explicitly as someone who chose truth over comfort, and he has a career scars to show for it. Whether you agree with everything Katt Williams says or not, the Ellen DeGeneres story raises a question that is worth sitting with seriously. How many other beloved public figures are performing kindness rather than practicing it? How many workplaces behind the scenes of celebrated television programs look nothing like the warmth projected on screen? And how many people who knew the truth stayed silent because the machinery of reputation and power made silence feel like the only safe option? Katt Williams has been issuing a version of this warning for his entire career, not as a crusade against any particular individual, but as a steady, persistent reminder that Hollywood is a town built on performance, and that a performance is not always confined to what you see on screen. The Ellen story did not surprise him. It confirmed what he had been saying all along. And if history has taught us anything about the entertainers willing to speak uncomfortable truths out loud, it is that the ones who seem most eccentric in the moment have a habit of seeming most prescient in hindsight. The final warning was never really about Ellen DeGeneres. It was about all of us, and how willingly we accept the image over the reality when the image is comfortable enough and the reality is inconvenient enough. Hollywood knew what Katt Williams was saying. They just hoped the rest of us were not listening closely and knew.